What is the most horrific torture device or execution method you've ever seen? Fictional or non-fictional? The one where they put you in a metal bowl and then heat it with a fire so that when you cook your screams can be heard. And then when you start to boil your water escapes in steam out of its nose. It's pretty horrific. I once witnessed a father with his 3-year-old daughter watching the Baby Shark video on his phone. Once it ended she would scream until he restarted the video. She watched that video about 10 times in a row and the look on his face was that of pure depression. So I'm going to go with that. Not the most fucked up, but it's definitely a weird one. White torture is a form of sensory deprivation where the imprisoned is kept in a white room, made to wear white clothes, as are all the guards, and they're even served white food on white plates. The lights are kept on at all times, no one was allowed to speak, and their shoes are padded to muffle sound. The lack of color is apparently very mentally damaging. To quote Iranian journalist Ibrahim Nabavi, "It is terrible. The loneliness never leaves you, long after you are free." Tying someone up, keeping them fed and hydrated and injecting heroin into them for months until one day you decide to just leave them to deal with dehydration, starvation and withdrawals. Keel hauling, the victim is dragged along the underside of a ship so that the barnacles will cut and shred them whilst simultaneously drowning them. Scaphism, they leave you in a tub of water, constantly feed you so that you keep on shitting. You end up covered in your own shit until your body starts getting devoured by the parasites which appear within your shit. Ling Chi, an ancient form of torture or execution from China in which the condemned is slowly and systematically cut into pieces through the use of literally hundreds or thousands of knives. There was a trial on this a while back on the Thailand chicken coop prison, where you'd be under the coop in the cell and the chicken's droppings would fall on you with no escape. Without ventilation you may actually die from a lung issue before being crushed or starving. Rat in a hotbox chained to a man's chest. With the Judas cradle, the victim would be bound in the air by their hands and feet and their nether regions would be lowered onto a pyramid-shaped spike. They could raise or lower the person onto it or even hang weights to pull them down on it harder. Actual URL. From Britannica, Scaphism was one of the worst and most painful, skin-crawling methods of torture. It was described by the Greeks as a punishment used by the Persians, and if they are to be believed, those Persians were insane. In this form of execution, the accused was trapped between two boats, or in a hollowed-out tree trunk, and force-fed milk and honey. Okay, that part doesn't sound so bad. But the milk and honey diet eventually caused horrible diarrhea, which stayed within the wooden enclosure. The unfortunate condemned was smeared with more milk and honey and left out in the sun or near still water, where bugs would be attracted to the muck and rotten sweetness. The person would inevitably die either of dehydration, exposure, or bite and sting wounds. Are these slow enough for you? Bamboo honeymoon, is what I call it. I'm sure they had another name. But essentially you get strapped in a case over bamboo and left there. They will come to feed you and put honey on your body, face, and make sure you stay alive, so you feel every inch of your body eaten by animals and insects, while the bamboo is growing into your rear end. It sometimes took up to 40 days for prisoners to die, when I remember correctly. And this is non-fictional. I can't come up with anything worse, really. In an episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Chief O'Brien had 20 years of prison time implanted in his memories. He never actually went to the prison, but he thought he did. It messed him up. He tried to kill himself over it. The writers of Star Trek really had it out for Chief O'Brien, poor guy. The pear of anguish looks pretty fucking awful. The pear consisted of a metal body, usually pear-shaped, divided into spoon-like segments that could be operated by turning a screw. This contraption was originally meant to be inserted to one's mouth to crank the key piece to expand the metallic petals. The quadruple or triple petals expand outward, forcing the victim's inner mouth capacity to stretch beyond its limits. Spanish donkey was another good one. One of the torture devices during the Spanish Inquisition. This is probably one of the most gruesome of them all. The naked victim is put astride, so that their feet can't touch the ground, on a donkey-like apparatus. The construction is made up of metal or wood, a vertical board with a sharp V-wedge on top of it. To enhance pain at this stage, torturers tied weights to the ankles. This caused rupturing of the perineum and copious blood loss, often ending with a painful apex as the sacrum bone breaks. The Syrian Ministry of the Interior used a tool called the Black Slave, that was basically a chair where the torture victim would sit on while nude. In the space under the cushion were large very hot skewers that would enter the victim's anus and keep going. It reached the intestines. They would do a push or pull method until the victim collapsed under the stress or spoke. One of the most brutal I ever heard of was that of Robert Francois Damien. Damien attempted to assassinate King Louis XV in 1757, so he was sentenced to death. Thousands of people showed up to witness the execution. First, the hand he attempted to stab the king with was dipped in ethanol and then lit on fire. Then they took red-hot metal pincers and ripped away his calves, quads, biceps, and triceps. They then poured molten metal into the gaping wounds where his muscles once were. After that, they tied each limb to a horse and made them ride in opposite directions. When it was clear that they weren't pulling hard enough to rip him apart, the soldiers beat Damien's joints with hammers to speed up the process. The entire ordeal lasted over 4 hours. While not explicitly for torture, there is a pretty horrific method in a short story called The Jaunt. Sometime in the future, humanity invents a method of instant teleportation. The thing is, you need to be knocked out by anesthesia prior to using it. The story goes into the history of the machine we're testing on animals, and later on, humans revealed that though the process of teleportation is outwardly instant, the conscious mind of the teleported experiences billions of years in a white void, alone but for the company of their own thoughts, unable to move, unable to die. One scientist shoves his wife, awake, into a machine and closes off the end point. He is convicted of murder because, although she is technically still alive, she's screaming somewhere in the ether, alone, for all of eternity. More of a method, but if you've ever read the Toy Box Killer transcripts, those are so terrifying. If you absolutely want to have your day ruined, this has to be one of the most disturbing, creepiest things ever. Serial killer David Parker Ray would play these tapes for his victims, so they had an idea of what was coming and to also mentally break them. Hear the start of one tape to give you an idea. "Hello there, bitch. Are you comfortable right now? I doubt it. Wrists and ankles chained. Gagged. Probably blindfolded. You are disoriented and scared too, I would imagine. Perfectly normal, under the circumstances. For a little while, at least. You need to get your shit together and listen to this tape. It is very relevant to your situation. I'm going to tell you, in detail, why you have been kidnapped, what's going to happen to you and how long you'll be here. I don't know the details of your capture, because this tape is being created July 23, 1993 as a general advisory tape for future female captives. This old guy I used to work with would tell stories about torture in Vietnam, and this one stuck with me. They'd tie the captive to a chair with his hands behind his back and bring in a hooker. She would pull his pants down and dance, touch, suck, whatever was necessary to get him rock hard. Then they would take a thin bamboo reed and slide it down his urethra. And they'd bend his dick in the middle really quick so that it snapped off inside. Meet the alkali bath. You have probably heard of an acid bath, but an alkali bath is the other end of the scale, and more than 40 times as painful as an acid bath. Basically, you get the sensation of being burned alive, but your brain will continue working longer, so you will feel every single burning pain that happens to your body. When you enter the alkali bath, and your flesh begins to dissolve, the pain will be intense, like being skinned alive. But then the inner layer of the skin starts to dissolve, and that's where the real pain begins. Add to that the alkalosis overexciting your nerves, causing them to become inflamed, and the convulsions that will soon follow, and you have what is probably the most painful way to die.
This is RedditJoe channel, and don't forget to hit subscribe down below for more upcoming videos.